Hey Alejandro, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Over.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you too. Um, so I got the slides here. Um, like, is it switching there?
Yep. It's a little
Cool.
small, but I don't know if that's just like I don't know why, but
Is that bigger?
yeah, you can go a little bit bigger still.
Okay. Let me see. Let me know.
I think you have like a tick or two left, but it's also good right now.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's because I'm like, um, I was trying to. So maybe I'll just do this. Is that full better?
Yeah, that's good. There's like
Cool.
black bars on the side, but I think it's fine. No problem. No bother.
Huh. It's kind of interesting. I mean, it's in presenter mode, so I don't know if that's why that's happening. Um, Let me close this out and close that out. Does it switch if is it switching right now?
It's switching. Yeah, yeah. You're on
Okay.
practice. Oh, now it froze a little bit, but we're back on practice.
Cool. So people they don't have like a way of like unmuting.
They might. I think they can ask to share, and then we can like give them access, or I don't know exactly the exact details. I remember yesterday that was the way it worked. Uh, don't know how other people have done it. It's possible that like no one will even want to. Uh,
Let's see how it goes. What
they'll
one
figure out.
thing I would mention, I'm pretty sure we're being recorded right now.
Yes, I agree with you.
Okay. So don't share all the
Yeah,
Facebook
no. It's all in my
handshakes and all that stuff. Like it's not a good time to
uh,
do that. Thank you for waking up early, man. I know it's
no, come on. I mean, I went to sleep pretty late, but it's fine. I'm happy to do it. Happy to be here.
how did it go yesterday?
It was pretty good. We had a lot of questions, a lot of interest about this specifically. A lot of the questions ended up being kind of like, how was your interview experience? What's the interview like? How did you prepare? Uh, I plugged this workshop,
Nice.
so a few people will come from there. I said it was going to be really cool. Um, yeah, a lot of interest in FBU as well. Uh, wish I had known a little bit more about it before I got on the call, but I think the best advice to give always is when in doubt, apply. Uh, so hopefully they take that advice.
Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, I think that's like, you know, people usually think the opposite. Like they're like, oh, I'll like figure out a bunch of stuff and then I'll
Yeah,
do something. And it's like, just do it.
yeah,
And you'll
of course.
figure it out once you're
At least
actually
with
doing it.
interviewing, that's very good advice. Like or with applying, I guess. Just apply
Yeah.
to as many places as possible, even ones that you don't think make sense. Uh, the worst that can happen is they say no. They had already said no if you didn't apply.
Yeah.
Just didn't feel it. um, but yeah, no. Hopefully they do. I think FBU is pretty cool. I know someone that went through it, and it's a pretty good starting point, especially for someone who's like a freshman or a sophomore. They teach you about mobile dev, gets you into Facebook, which is pretty nice.
I wonder like what I mean, I've been looking at other sessions just to kind of get an idea, but like the Salesforce one, if it's like accurate, um, it's like 100 something people. Was that kind of like the
Oh, that's a lot. No, ours said like 40 yesterday, in and out. So we'd go like from 35 to maybe like 45, I think was the highest I saw. I wish I had taken some time to kind of like sneak out of the room and go look at the other ones just to see if there was anything we were doing that maybe wasn't optimal or, uh, but we just had a lot of questions, so we just spent a lot of time going through them.
Cool. Did, uh, I mean, was the crowd mostly students from FIU, or was there like a little bit of a
Not
mix?
exclusively. I can't. I don't know exactly how much. But I think there was like a good mix of. There was definitely some FIU people, if not a lot of FIU people. But there was also. I saw a few UCF. I remember there was a college as well. Like the name of the school was something college. Uh, so I think there's like a healthy mix.
Cool. Yeah. So I mean, I guess it's fine then. I think we were talking about it yesterday to kind of assume um, sort of wide range of understanding of things,
Yeah.
as opposed to just maybe close to graduating CS students. I think since we're not like since I'm like the one sharing, like whenever you want me to like go next, like I'll try to sort of intuitively sort of feel out when
Yeah.
it's time, but if it's
No,
not
of
happening,
course.
just let me know. Just next slide.
Yeah, that's completely fine.
Okay. When's that? Is that in Seattle? I don't know. Where's that picture?
That is Seattle. That's I mean the picture is like very pixelated because I've like reshared it in Workplace and then like re-downloaded it a few times.
I did the
And then
exact
sent
same
it
thing.
again because that's the only way I know how to get it. And it's also like a little bit stretched or narrowed. I don't know, but that's Seattle. The city behind it, Space Needle, and then Mount Rainier shows up, but it's pretty hard to see in that photo. So it's the classic Seattle view, the one you see in magazines and newspapers, if those still exist.
I mean, I haven't read a newspaper in a while, so like a physical newspaper.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. Same.
um, have you been to San Francisco?
Only for my interview and for
Oh,
new hire orientation. And I did not actually go into the city. I went from the airport to the valley, valley to the office, office to the. I guess no, that doesn't make sense. But anyways, I just went to the valley and back.
cool. Hey, Peterson. Oh, saw somebody said hey on the
Hello.
chat. It's a bummer. I wish I mean, I don't know if uh, the kind of capabilities it has as far as potential load if everybody was sharing their cameras. Um, but it would have been nice
Yeah,
if we could like interact with people more.
there's a lot of people. Hello,
How do you
everyone.
know? Oh, I see 21, 22. Hey, everyone. We'll give some, maybe, I don't know, till 12:32 or something before we get started to give people a chance to join. They should have like a little music feature, right now.
There might be. I don't know.
Uh, do you have any like beatboxing skills, Alejandro, that you can
I have no
show off
musical
for a fun?
talents whatsoever.
No?
No,
Oh,
my the best I can do is just not offer any before they leave.
maybe we can open it up for people. Anybody interested in can do like a mean oh man, what is that? Jeopardy music sound. It's wonderful that this is recorded, and I keep forgetting. Is crushing your coding interview a good thing? Like, I don't know. Like, I just thought about like the potential title, maybe, you know.
Sounds a bit aggressive. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. You're gonna crush it. Crushing it is not always a good thing. Is it always a good thing? Hey, David. Yeah, I don't know if dominate is better. I'm not sure.
Demoralize the interviewers.
Great suggestions.
Interview
I think that's always a good idea. Like, you turn it around on the interview. What do you think about that? How would you implement it? I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, I feel like if you execute it well, I think it's possible that it's a good idea. So yeah, we're, for as folks are joining, we're kind of giving people a little bit of time to join, and taking suggestions on what should be what could be a better name for our presentation. I like annihilate your interview. I don't think anybody has to get fired though, Robin. Like, I feel like, we all need to eat. Like, it's better when we all win. It's a win-win-win, not a win-lose for somebody.
It's not an exciting title, but it could also be pass your coding interview. It's pretty self-explanatory. Pass your coding interview.
Do you want to pass your coding interview, or do you want to crush your coding interview? Hey, Mo.
I think the important part is passing it. Does it matter how you get it done?
You're not thinking big enough, man.
Oh, man.
Time is it?
It's 9:32. We can maybe wait until 9:33 or begin.
Okay, begin. Let's give it to 33.
I think most of it is just introductions at the beginning, so the content won't be lost by people showing up a few minutes late.
I mean, I feel like the intro might be the best.
Not mine.
How we get to know each other. No? Okay, we're gonna get started. So, I mean, I guess first, you'll see throughout the presentation this little link, checkinpiazza.com with the event ID 4311. I think at the very least, something that we want to do with everybody that's joining today is get a chance to connect with you guys, reach out, ask them your questions, and this is the best way for us to do it. So please check in, let us know any questions that you have, stay in contact. I don't think you need to check in again, but that's a really good question. I mean, maybe for fun, just do it twice. Like, just really make sure the form submitted. You could, but I'm playing around. I don't think you need to check in again. So yeah, please let's connect, check in, and let's do quick intros. My name is Francisco. I'm an engineering manager at Facebook. I actually kind of grew up here in Dade County, lived here in 12 years, attended high school at Felix Varela, go Vipers. I don't know if there are any Vipers here. And I also went to school at FIU. I'm a math major, but I think I was able to join UPE, which I'm not sure is allowed, but if there's some records out there, I might show up there. And super excited to get a chance to do this and talk about this with all of y'all. Actually, Alejandro, maybe you can introduce yourself too, and I'll try to sort of answer some of the questions.
Hey everyone, I'm Alejandro. I graduated from FIU December 2019, and then I started working at Facebook as a software engineer February of 2020. Since then, I've been on ads, and I've also worked on Facebook Timeline. I have no fun facts. I did not grow up in Miami, but I did go to school there.
Cool. Okay. So agenda for today, we just did the check-in. We'll talk a little bit about, some sort of good concepts and ideas around how you do interviews. And then I think we'll also get into some actual problems and kind of talk through those and see some best practices. I sort of prefer these types of meetings when they're interactive. If the best thing that we can do is chat messages, like we'll do that. But feel free to sort of send questions throughout. We'll do our best to answer. I'm not sure where we will get the recording, but I'm sure somebody will be able to share that information. Cool. So let's get started. It says not to record this, but I think it's recorded, so no worries there. Cool. So how do I prepare for an interview? I mean, I think it goes without saying that practice is pretty important. But something else to sort of mention there is, it's not a deterministic process, right? Like I don't think that it's like a formula. If you do 100 problems, you get the interview or you don't. There's people involved in all of this. Somebody's maybe having a good day, maybe having a bad day. So I think, no matter how hard, I think it's on you and sort of as an interviewer to do your best to prepare, and work hard to sort of get there, and then, sort of live with the outcome. I've done my best to prepare for tons of interviews and I haven't gotten them. I've stumbled in some interviews that I've gotten because the person that I talked to had a good time as we were talking. So, there's a lot that goes into it that's outside of our control. So I think what we're talking about here today is the things that will be in your control as you're preparing for an interview. So what is it that we're trying to gauge, when we're looking, when we're sort of doing this interview, right? Like, I think we all that've been part of interviews understand that it's like this very odd process. You show up, a couple of hours, they ask you a bunch of questions, and that's sort of how it's determined. And I think maybe we all wish it was a little bit different. But at its core, what we're trying to get is an understanding of how you work, how you would tackle problems, how you think about solving those problems. We're also trying to test a little bit of your knowledge, sort of technical CS background type knowledge. And again, just trying to see like how you communicate as you're solving problems, right? Because, I think all of us that have been in engineering teams, you work with a bunch of people and sort of trying to gauge, get signal on how that would be in an actual work environment is what we're trying to gauge when we're interviewing folks. So one key thing about Facebook interviews is that we're not trying to do sort of puzzle type things. I remember when I got out of school, like the fad was that they would say like, if we shrunk you to be 3 inches tall and threw you in a blender, how would you get out? Like that, those are like the types of interview questions that people would ask. Like that's not, nobody's gonna ask you that at Facebook. We're mostly talking about data structure type problems and common sort of CS sort of related problems that you have to solve, maybe with a small twist to them, but at its core, it's mostly data structures. So what does it mean, when I talk about data structures? And I know, I'm sure that there's people with a bunch of different backgrounds participating here. So for some people, I'm sure that it's sort of something that you understand and you cover, but I still wanted to talk about it. So basically, I would say it's common ways for solving problems, common structures and algorithms that we have. And usually, there's some component of the complexity around the time, or the space complexity as well. Something else that I think it's pretty cool or good to know as you're interviewing is it's a good sign if you're sort of presented with a problem and you use a common library to solve that problem, right? Like I think Googling what you should use for a problem, or reusing some already existing solution is a really good sign. It's something that we do all the time in our engineering teams. So using a common library, great idea, and is a good sign. So what are some data structures that you should probably spend some time looking at? So strings, arrays, array lists, queues, stacks, maps, hash map sets, linked lists, trees, graphs. These are all very common data structures, and of course, like, this list is not exhaustive, but I would say at the very least, when you're preparing, you should really concentrate on these. What's the format of the interview? So usually the way that it's going to go is you'll have an intro section, then you'll have some coding, and then some Q&A for asking questions. If you're someone like me that likes to talk a lot and can just spend a bunch of time just yammering about stuff that's not important, just be cautious about spending your time effectively, and mostly focusing on completing the coding question. A few things there. Don't get worried if for whatever reason in the middle of solving a problem somebody stops you. A lot of what we're doing as interviewers is trying to get particular signal on certain areas, right? So if we get that signal and we're comfortable with that signal as we're presenting the interview, then there's no need to kind of keep going down that route. So don't get stumped or feel like there's something necessarily wrong if for whatever reason the interviewer sort of stops in one section and moves on to something else. I think another key thing is like taking the mindset of testing your code, and that'll help you in multiple different areas. One, to sort of get an understanding of what the question is and what you're trying to solve. But then eventually, there will be a time that you're actually going to be testing your code, and sort of picking from the start, or thinking from the start with that sort of test first sort of mentality. I think it's valuable. So general steps for a successful interview, and I think the first one is really, really, really key. Many times I see that I think because we're under pressure, we know it's like a time type thing, and there's like a time constraint around it. Like, we hear the question and then we immediately start coding, and that is not a great start. Even if you feel very, very confident that you know what the answer is or the solution is for the problem, I think repeating the question, getting clarification, thinking about and discussing edge cases, and then I know that it's not the most natural thing, but doing your best to consistently sort of talk out loud, say what you're thinking. Like, I think oftentimes in interviews, I see folks that go quiet, and I try my best to kind of sort of get in there and get them out of sort of that sort of quiet mindset, because I know that that's how we think generally, right? Like, we're at home trying to solve a problem, like, we're not sort of talking out loud to ourselves. But it is key for us to be able to gauge and understand how the interview is going, that you think out loud and you kind of try to communicate your best what is happening. There's generally not a specific language that we look for as we're solving problems. We tell people to sort of code in whatever language works best for them. The only cases that there might be is if you're sort of applying for a specific position that requires a specific language. Say, for example, if you're like an iOS engineer, then in those cases, those types of questions might be fair game as well. Cool. So, like I said, something that we wanted to do is kind of talk through and walk through a few questions. And as an EM, I'm gonna do my best to actually hand it over to a real professional here, and Alejandro, and have him kind of walk through these questions. And again, some interaction is definitely welcome. So take it away, Alejandro.
Yeah, thank you. That was really helpful. So I guess following up on the last question that was asked about specific languages, yeah, I agree. Definitely, there is no particular language, especially for your internship interviews or your new grad interviews. If you're asking me, I did it in Java. Another popular choice is Python. Those are pretty good interviewing languages. Python especially is pretty good. It's very short, very easy to do stuff. A lot of people learn it for interviews, and it's not a bad use of your time. But obviously, the more important thing is preparing for the interview. So if you have to make a choice, probably better to practice questions than learn Python. But if you have time for both, definitely worth considering. And there's one more question, I guess, quickly before we start about cloud or certain frameworks for the SDE1 position. At Facebook, I don't know if we have SDE1, but the equivalent would be New Grad. There's actually no expectation about having certain expertise in technologies. Technologies at Facebook are pretty in-house, so you'll learn them on the job, and you'll have a fun time kind of getting to use them. They're all pretty neat, but definitely no expectations. It doesn't hurt, but I don't think there's any certain frameworks that would help you, that would be helpful to know over others. Just wanted to get that in, I guess, before we start. So now we're going to do a few interview questions. I don't know how much we'll do. We'll probably do 1, 2, maybe 3. I think the important thing I want to mention is that we're not going to focus so much on the code as more on what Francisco just went over. How do we approach the problem? How do we ask questions? So the code aspect you'll end up learning is actually one of the easier aspects of the job, compared to having to talk with other people, talking to someone in London who's 8 hours behind or 8 hours ahead. So it's important to kind of like the same idea applies here, where we want to figure out how to get through the process, and the code will just be a small part of it right now. To begin with, we have a question. Your code is stored in a version control system. For those who don't know what a version control system is, it's how we keep track of our code, essentially the different versions that have been in it. That way anyone can go to any of them and check them out, see what would happen, what were the changes. The best way to think about it is it's just a sequential order of all the versions of the code. We can just assume that they're which numbers all versions sequentially. So it's pretty straightforward. If you see a bug in your code and it wasn't there before, write a function to find the revision that introduced the bug. So that's the prompt for the question, which leads to what is the first thing that we want to do after the interviewer tells us the question. If anyone wants to answer in the chat, I'll be happy to wait a few seconds. Otherwise, I can just go forward. Yeah, I mean, I think the last comment here nails it exactly. We want to reiterate the question and then ask clarifying questions. So it's important to ask the interviewer questions, but we want to make sure that we understand the problem the way the interviewer understands the problem. So we might repeat it back to them. So we have XYZ. In this case, we might say something along the lines of, I think the next slide has the exact words, but essentially we want to make sure that we understand what they understand. So I might say, so we have a list of versions of code, or we have a list of versions. We want to find out when it became bad. So they're all good until they become bad. That might be a way to like reiterate it. Francisco, if you go to the next slide, there's a way better reiteration than the one I just did. All right, I have a bug at some code version. I know it didn't always exist. The versions are numbered sequentially. So hopefully what you say back to the interviewer is what they had in mind. If not, they will tell you maybe or ask or help you or give you a hint, or just reiterate the question if that's the problem, or restate the question. Is the screen blank? All right, I'm going to take a second to ask if the screen is blank for anyone else. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, cool. Thank you everyone for chiming in. Yeah, so it's going to be, so we're going to essentially make sure that we understand the problem correctly. And that's the first thing we do. Once we feel confident that we do, and the interviewer has kind of said, yeah, that makes sense to me, or that is kind of what I said, then we begin to ask questions. We kind of want to figure out any details or any edge cases that are going to be important to our solution that we might not know yet. So for this problem, one of those questions could be, how do we know if a version is good, right? Like, I haven't, that's a good question. It's, you want to know you have to implement your own way to find this, or they're going to give you a way to find this, or if there's a way you can check. In this case, they're going to give us a function, which is bad, and you pass in a number to it. So we can already kind of get from that the versions are just represented as numbers, and that we have a function that will tell us if it's bad or good. We can probably assume that it's going to return a Boolean, but we can also ask just to make sure. And then in terms of, do we know, I think this one's kind of interesting. What's the known bad version? What's the known good version? Those will be parameters you are given. I think most of the time you can expect that they will be, you won't know. You kind of just know maybe like one bad version, one good version, and that's what we're trying to figure out. What is the first one? So for all intents and purposes, we could just think of the known good version. Actually, I'm going to take a step back. A question that's not mentioned here that might be worth asking is, are we guaranteed that there was a good version? That's a kind of like edge case, but for the most part, we want to find out, like, can we assume that 0 is a good version and that the last one is a bad version? If we can assume that, then we kind of know where to begin with. Yeah, I'm trying to think if I missed anything.
I mean, I saw one comment, you could use a binary search so you don't have to call on every version number. Any other sort of thoughts maybe from folks on, does that sound like a good idea? Any other clarifying questions that they think might be good to ask?
How large are the inputs at maximum? That's a good question. Your interviewer might say you can assume that it's smaller than int max in your language. So the maximum number that can be in an int. Is there a consistent time frame for each version? Not too sure exactly what specifically you're asking, but I guess I would say that you can assume that they're in order. So like they're sequential. So version 1 comes after version 0, which version 1 gets followed by version 2. And you can assume that they're like in that order in time. I'm not sure if it's going to matter, but you can ask. Is the number of versions we currently have definite? Yeah, you. That's a good question to ask. You might ask, like, how do you know, like, what is like the biggest version? It's important to know, like, at the beginning of, like, what is how big is your input essentially. So the interviewer might tell you that they'll tell you how big the input is. They'll tell you that we have n versions, where n can be any number from 1 to int max, which is, or maybe 2, because if we know there's a bad version, we know there's also a good version. So then we can assume that we have maybe 2 versions, and the limit is as many versions as an int can take, which is pretty big. What if we can keep track of the versions with output if the code is bad or good? A hash table of hash map. So I think the next question or the question after the next question will help us kind of figure out what we think about that, which is, after a bad version, are all the following bad? Yeah, you can assume that someone put in a bad change and then they've broken the code for everyone. So until that one gets fixed, which first we need to identify, we're going to have some broken code, sadly. Not really relevant to the problem, but the way this works is a lot of people can work on the same code, and they can work for different parts as well. So maybe like someone's working on some Facebook code, someone's working on some Instagram code, someone broke the Facebook code. So now we can assume that even though the Instagram code is good, they're all in the same place. So you have a bad version somewhere in there. What data type should we return? That's actually a good question to always ask. What should we return? Should we return the number? Should we return an object, a list? In this case, your interviewer will probably say that you should return the first bad version is what we want to return. So it's going to be a number or an int. Cool. So we've reiterated the question. We've asked for some edge cases. We've thought about some approaches to solve the problem. I think at this point, it's always a good idea to kind of explain to the interviewer what you want to do. So, so my first approach is going to be pretty simple. I'm going to say, I think I can go through the list from beginning to end and just wait until I find the first bad version. So I just go through it in order. And then your interviewer might say like, oh, that would work, but do you think there's a faster way to do it? It's always good to do this part because you don't want to start coding something that the interviewer maybe is not looking for. So if you can get the signal from the interviewer that there might be a better solution, or that maybe you're not even your solution might not work, it's a good idea to have the interviewer kind of know before you start writing code. Someone asked, we should always start with the naive approach, right? I think the naive approach is better than nothing, and you should definitely, after a certain point, if that's what you have, you should go with it. It's a tough trade-off. It depends on the problem. You kind of get better at it with experience. The more interviews you do, the better you get at realizing when it's time to do the naive approach and when it's time to maybe think a little bit more if there's a better approach. But the naive approach is better than nothing, and definitely if you don't have any other ideas, what you should go with.
Yeah, and I think what Alejandro said is pretty valuable too. I think communicating the naive approach, what potentially is the naive approach, is always something good as well. Yeah. Because you might get some feedback from the interviewer that's like, yeah, that's an approach which gets you, hey, you can actually solve this problem. But also oftentimes you'll get, is there something, is there a better approach, or or a faster way of solving it? So I think that's why it's always good to, at the very least, communicate the naive approach.
Can you give an example of using the naive approach? So an example of this is if we know that there's 3 versions of the code and we know that one of them is bad, we might just start checking from the beginning, right? So we check version 1 and we check is bad, and we find out that it's good. So then we check the next one. We also find out that it's good. So then we check the one that follows it, and then we find out that one is bad. And that's the answer that we can return. So this is good when the bad version is at the very beginning, but sometimes there can be a lot of versions, like millions, and it could be at the very end, the bad version. So we might want to think of something that's a little bit more performant or just better. Yeah, the naive approach would be the linear search that I just mentioned. Someone mentioned the binary search before, which sounds like a good idea. Yep, that's sort of a good idea. I agree. So we might mention to the interviewer something like, oh, I think if we, pick a version somewhere down the middle, and then we check if it's good or bad, we know that if the version is good, that the bad version must be to the right. Or if we know that the version is bad, we know that there could potentially be another bad version to the left, because this might not be the first one. So that's an intuition for how to solve this problem. At this point, your interviewer has hopefully kind of like given you a nod or like agreed that your approach is good, or might even explicitly say, all right, let's code it up. I know many interviewers have said that to me. So then at that point, you begin coding. I think at this point, it's important to communicate what you're doing. So you might write your function definition and just, make sure that it's right. Just double check. Any assumptions that you make along the way, it's important to say. Any trade-offs, if you, for example, use a hash map over a hash set or something, well, that's a little bit more straightforward, but any decision that you make, it's sometimes worth explaining just to, it provides the interviewer with kind of like an idea of what you're thinking, what you're doing, and they can also help make sure that you're on the right track. Sometimes you might be thinking something that's going to take you in the wrong direction. So your interviewer might give you a nudge to bring you back in the right direction. That's completely okay. It's better than working in the wrong direction. So definitely take those when you get them. We'll go over the code shortly. For those that know, this is a binary search. For those that don't, that's fine. The idea behind this approach is we check somewhere in the middle or exactly in the middle. Is non-equal good first version? No. Yeah, it's possible that your input could be different. But in this case, let's assume that it's always no one knows. It's just broken. Someone complained, the customer, user complained that something's not working, and then someone checked and they don't know why it's not working. So they might want to find what is the last version that was working to go back to it, for example, because it's a really important issue to fix. So the code, we do a binary search. So we see high, which is known bad, low, which is known good, and then we find out what is the middle and we check if it's bad. Again, the intuition here is that if we know a version is bad, or better said, if we know a version is good, then we know the version that is bad is later in time, which means it's going to be to the right or it's going to be a higher number. If we know that a version is bad, then we still don't know if the version is if that is the first version that was bad. We know that is bad, but there might be an earlier version that is bad. So we want to check again, but checking the ones that became before that or to the left or previous. And finally, we just want to return what is the first known bad, which is what we do here. In terms of the code, I wouldn't worry about it too much if you understand it or not. That's easily learnable, and the more problems you do, the more you'll kind of get better at this. Is there any questions about this one, about the code or anything before we move on to the next step of the interview? Cool. Then next step, does anyone know what the next step is? Oh, there we go. Does anyone know what the next step should be after we've written our code? Review, analyze it, time, dry run, review it, then test it. Yeah, these are all pretty good. Take a look at it, make sure that it makes sense to you. Go top to bottom, and then we got to test it. We want to make sure that the code works, and we want to prove to the interviewer that it works. So we might think of a few inputs, right? We might think, oh, what if there's 5 versions or 3 versions, for example, and what if the third one is the bad one, or the last one, or the first one? And then we just kind of run through the code. It's a little bit hard to do here because I can't really write. Hopefully during an interview, you'd be able to write it out as you go along it. But we see that we have Rev 123 as the first version, and we have Rev 545 as the bad version. And we're looking for some version in between there to know that it's bad and it was the one that introduced the bug. So then we assume, what if 124 is first bad? And then you can also check, what if it's 545? What if it's 544? What if it's 300? Most of the time, you don't have to run through too many examples. Running through 1 or 2 examples, maybe covering an edge case should be enough. Mostly, you're just trying to make sure that any mistakes you catch them before, hopefully, the interviewer mentions them to you. So you run through your code, go line by line, kind of a little bit quickly. You'll get better at it the more you do it, and kind of just see what happens at each step. So, for example, we might check the first one is we check version 300, then we check version 150, then we check version 127 or something, and eventually we realize that we hit version 124, and our program is working correctly. If we realize our program is not working correctly, then we should take a look and double check that everything makes sense. Maybe we missed an easy part. Very common to have a greater than going the wrong way or something like that. So this is a good way to find it once you realize wait, why am I going that way? Cool. Then after that,
Actually, maybe a quick question that or quick thing that I'll mention here is and you mentioned already, Hunter, but I wanted
go
to
for it.
reiterate it. So as interviewers, so part of the signal that we're trying to get is how you problem solve, right? But part of the signal that we're also trying to get is how you react to feedback, right? So that interviewer is there to kind of work with you as you're working and you're figuring out this problem. And for the most part, you know, like we want to hire people. Like, so that person is there, even as an interviewer, they're trying to sort of find ways to help you be successful. So like pay attention to what they're saying. Like I oftentimes have interviewed people and I'm trying to get them some direction or a hint in the direction that they should go. And they just, because they're very focused on whatever, maybe the approach that they're trying to take, or the perspective that they taken on what the solution should be, they pretty much ignore what I'm trying to say. So again, like listening to feedback, and adjusting to that feedback, I think it's also a pretty valuable signal that we're looking for as interviewers. And I think, like Alejandro said, like I actually, in my Facebook interview, I switched the greater than and less than, and I think um, like stepping through the code and being sort of meticulous as you're doing that, it is actually pretty valuable. And I think whenever we're like writing code somewhere, like oftentimes we have like a debugger or something that you can use to kind of step through the code. So extra like working through maybe something that doesn't have a debugger and you manually sort of like checking things, I think it's valuable as well.
Yeah, I think that's all really important. I always had in mind whenever the interviewer said anything, kind of just like stop and listen to them very closely. Interviewers, if they're speaking, it's for a reason, and you should definitely listen to them. The worst thing you can do is get repeated hints, ideas, suggestions from the interviewer and kind of just ignore them, because you're probably going down the wrong path, and it doesn't look good that you were not willing to kind of consider other approaches. How long would you typically spend on each stage of the interview? It's a good question. I think I'm going to finish this problem because we're really close to finishing it, and then I'll come back to answer this. So then we've tested our code. We know that it's working the way we think it should. So then the last thing we do is the interviewer will probably ask you, what is the runtime of your code? How fast is it, using kind of like the proper notation, and what is the space? For this code, we can kind of take a look at it, and we know that the function find bad revision takes in an int, or I guess, my bad, no. We know that we have this function. We can take a look at the different parts of it. We know that checking is bad. We might ask the interviewer, like, oh, what is the runtime of this? They'll say it's 01, it's constant, it's really fast. So then we're just trying to find out how many times do we run through this code. We can look that every single time we kind of get rid of half the input. So we see that this is log n. If you don't know what that means, or if you're not sure, don't worry about it. You'll learn it at some point in a class. If not, there's a lot of materials online to learn about it. It is not hard. It just takes a little bit of getting used to. And then after that, most of the time, you'll be able to quickly tell kind of just by looking at the code and thinking about the way it runs, the way it works. For the space, there's an answer for constant space, which is correct. We see that we're not really adding any extra memory anywhere. We just have an int here, an int there. That's fine. One thing, sometimes when you're talking about these problems, the average case might be different from the worst case, which might be different from the best case. Mentioning that is always a plus. If you mention like, oh, in the best case, it can be constant because we like blah. But the best case is not always what happens. So we want to talk also about the average case, which is what most people will run into. So we mentioned, oh, it's going to be X or Y or Z. And then finally, we want to talk about the worst case. It might not happen a lot. It might require a special edge case. But when it does, it's important to know so that way we can prevent any problems. So that's kind of how we go about space and time complexity. Finally, the interviewer might ask you, is there any way we can do better? Oftentimes, just kind of talk with them about it. They won't ask you to code it again most times, I've noticed. Maybe they do, but it's pretty normal part. Just asking, is there any way we can make this better, shorter, not shorter, better, like performance, like space, time, complexity. But it's pretty normal stuff. Here we have the runtime analysis, which explained a little bit better than I did. We look at the steps of our algorithm. We know that finding the midpoint is 01. We know that checking the midpoint is 01. And we know that we got to keep going until we find the first bad revision after the last good revision. We have the insight that each iteration discards half the data. So we know that the algorithm must be log n. I already mentioned that this may be binary search, and so did you guys. But in case you didn't, this is an example of binary search. It's a pretty powerful pattern kind of for solving problems. You'll realize a lot of problems you can kind of do this with them. And it's always pretty performant. So again, this is more of something you kind of notice. The more problems you do, the quicker you are to realize this sounds like a binary search. You don't know exactly what are the details of it, but you know that there's going to be a binary search at some point. I'm going to go back to the question about how long would you typically spend on each stage of the interview. I think this is very like, there's not a formula for this. You kind of figure it out. I think for understanding, coding, reviewing, you want to go as fast as possible, but you want to make sure that you're thorough. You want to make sure that you check everything. So it kind of takes the time that it takes. You want to make sure that you understand the question correctly. You want to make sure that you understand what are the edge cases, what are the inputs. I think ideally you'd want to spend most of your time coding, but you don't want to spend your time coding something that you don't understand. So it's important. And you can practice all three of those skills: understanding, coding, reviewing. Mock interviews is a good way to practice understanding. Leak code is a good way to practice coding or just practice problems. And reviewing is just running through your code afterwards. The better you get at all of these, the better you'll do. Sorry, I don't have like an exact formula. I think the more interviews you do and the more problems you practice, you'll kind of get an understanding of how long you should take. But definitely focus on hopefully having most of your time coding.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I mean, I think, what you see is, sort of, I don't know, if you're doing like an hour-long interview, maybe 5 to 10 minutes tops. Intros, maybe more like 5, hopefully 10 if you're me, and like talking a lot. Maybe like 5 to 10 minutes, sort of trying to understand the problem, and then again, like the bulk of the time you want to spend it coding and solving the solution and leaving yourself time to do that. But then on the back end, you also want to have some, couple, again, maybe like 5 to 10 for verification, and then the rest of the time Q&A with the person that you're interviewing. It might be good too, like to talk to the interviewer about their expectations, right? Sometimes and this might be a little bit different in Facebook, but I've interviewed in a lot of places, and it's different. The interviewer might be explicit about what their expectations are on the time that it's going to take, and sort of getting that signal is really valuable. Like maybe they're thinking they have 2 problems instead of 1, and 1 is supposed to be quicker, and you don't if you end up spending the whole time solving that one, then you won't sort of reach the next sort of harder problem. So or I've seen variations where the interviewer might start with like a sort of simpler version of the problem, and then kind of keep making it harder and harder. So again, talking to the interviewer and trying to understand their expectations is pretty valuable as well. And again, I'm mentioning like experience at different companies. Facebook might be a little different on that.
Yeah. I think that covers quite a bit. So how many coding questions do they usually ask during the coding portion? This kind of varies by company. At Facebook, you can typically expect maybe 2 questions. Sometimes if the question's a little bit harder, it's only 1. But you can always ask your interviewer, I think is a good way to go about it. Or they might even tell you like, hey, I have 2 questions for you. So definitely like there's not a set number, but somewhere between 1 and 2 is a pretty good expectation for an interview. Another way that it works sometimes is a question might have like 4 or 5 like harder steps. So they'll start you like on the easiest version, and you just kind of get through as many as you can. Google's pretty popular for doing that. So there's different ways that questions get asked. The best way is just to ask your interviewer if you're unsure. What skills other than data structures and algorithms are given the most focus on for new grads? I think that's for the coding interview, that's going to be the bulk of it, and definitely what you should focus on. You'll probably have a little bit of a behavioral portion when you get to talk about yourself and your experiences. But most part will be your knowledge of data structures and algorithms, but a large part of it as well must be mentioned that it's going to be how you work with the interviewer. The interview is collaborative. The interview is, think of it as the interviewer being on your team. So when he asks you a question, when he gives you a hint, can you take those? Do you ask the right questions? All that stuff is also very important, but definitely focus on your data structures and algorithms and mock interviews. Mock interviews is a good way to prepare to make sure that you're ready to go. Are we judged on the basis of how clean do we write the code? Yes, within reason. No one expects you to have like perfect code in 35 minutes, but there are some pretty bad patterns to avoid, or just, do your best. Make sure when you're doing when you're practicing, look at other solutions, see what you could have done better. But for the most part, yeah, but don't stress about it. Try to do as best as you can. I'm sorry if that was not the most best answer, but it's kind of tough.
I mean, but I think it's sort of I think the most important thing is solving, sort of kind of getting through the problem and working through the problem, right? So if you have like the world's most beautiful code, but you're not working with the interviewer, you're not asking the right questions, you're not figuring out the solution, then that is not sort of the best place to be. But again, like, we're trying to get signal about how you problem solve, right? And the way that you write code is signal on that as well. So I think, there's no black and white, but I think that's sort of general good guidance.
Yeah. It seems like we have quite a bit of questions, which I think I'm really happy to get to. I think we can move to questions. Before that, I want to ask really quickly, is there any questions about the question we just did? Anyone had any doubts, anything that maybe they didn't get to ask yet? If not, then I think we can start just doing all the questions that we have in the chat already and the ones that you may have yet to ask. Yeah, I mean, we have like 13 minutes. I think it's a good time to kind of move over to questions. There's a slide for it, but it's pretty far. It's going to be like near the end. There might also be some more stuff to get through. So I mean, maybe we should get through it first. Some main takeaways. This is kind of just the steps on the interview. Here we have some final tips. I think the most important one is probably the first one, practice. This is definitely a learnable skill. No one kind of just knows this. Everyone that I've ever met who I work with at Facebook or other companies, they all had to practice. They all spent time learning this stuff. It's kind of, the work that you put in the practice increases your chances of passing the interview. So a few tips about that is simulate the interview, time yourself, right? In an interview, you might have 45 questions on a problem or a question. So maybe try to time box yourself to that constraint. Try to mimic the interview. So if you're having a virtual interview, you might be coding in a code editor, which is not an IDE, so it won't autocomplete stuff for you. So maybe you want to practice in a similar scenario. Also, if you're going to be going on site, I don't know when, but hopefully in the future, pretty soon, you'll be expected to write your code on a big wall pretty much. Take advantage, practice on a whiteboard. It definitely is a little bit different and it's worth practicing. And finally, in terms of problems, there's a lot of problems. I think over 2,000 now on leetcode.com. My suggestion around that is do some easies to kind of get in the groove of things, but then focus mostly on the mediums. Don't pay too much attention to the hards, and definitely practice. I think it's just the most important thing. For virtual interviews, which are very current, go somewhere quiet with a good internet connection. It might be worth just making sure that the spot you pick works well. So maybe get on a VC with a friend, video call, and just try to make sure that your spot is going to be good when the interview happens. It would really suck for you to test everything the first time during the interview, and maybe it doesn't work. Your interviewer will probably reschedule, but I think it, better safe than sorry in that case. Mock interviews, get a friend to do a mock interview, then swap. That's obviously very good advice. Additionally, there's websites for this nowadays. I believe one of them is called Pramp, where you kind of get to mock interview people and they mock interview you. So you don't even need to like have a friend who's available. You'll always find someone available online, which is pretty cool. And continue practicing. It's mentioned twice because it really is, this is a very learnable skill that is very useful because this is the way interviews happen for the most part. So definitely practice as much as you can, and make sure to be, deliberate about it. Like you're trying to learn more. So touch different topics, maybe the ones that you're not so good at. If you're not good at graphs, focus on doing graph problems, array problems, tree problems, whatever you think you could use some work on. Target it, because you never know what they might ask you, and the best thing you can do is be as prepared as possible. That is the way to optimize your chances. Someone linked Pramp, so thank you. That's really cool. Cool. That's my final tips. I don't know if Francisco has an additional final tip he wants to give.
Yeah, maybe like a quick one as far as sort of the process. It's if you're working with a recruiter, as you're kind of sort of doing the interview process, like they're a great source of information. I know for a fact that I wouldn't be here at Facebook if I didn't have a great recruiter that was really pulling for me to get the job, right? So think of them as sort of a resource and somebody that's on your team that really, really wants to get you hired. So just I think ask them questions. They'll give you resources around how to prepare. Like anything that you have, like that you're not sure about, anything that you need help with. Your recruiter again wants to get you hired, and so you should really work closely with them as you're sort of getting and working on joining Facebook. So maybe that's like the only thing that I'll mention. And then I think now. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say I agree 100%. My recruiter was Ernesto, and he was really cool about it. Helped answer all the questions I had. It was like my first time flying out for an interview. It's kind of a scary time. Recruiters want you to pass the interview. That really is good for them. So definitely ask as many questions as you can. They'll share as much as they can, sometimes maybe even a little bit more. So don't be afraid. Like if you ask something that maybe they can't answer, the worst they'll say is, I can't answer that, which is fine because you're in the same spot you were before. Cool. In terms of questions, there's a few of them already there, and feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll try to go through them as quickly as possible. Are system design questions common for new grad interviews? I don't think system design is common across the industry for new grad interviews. At Facebook, definitely not. What is a little bit more common at other places is object-oriented design. So they might ask you to think of a problem and solve it using, object-oriented principles. Definitely look up these type of interviews. I think Google asked me one of them. Amazon asked me one of them. Facebook didn't, but they're definitely out there. And it's another skill that you can practice. And they're actually pretty fun. They're a little bit closer to real code than leak code. But I think system design are not common. That's the ones that I wouldn't really expect for new grad interviews. For resources to practice, leak code, Pramp, your friends, anything that helps you get more practice in, but especially leak code. You'll find a lot of problems there, which is the most important part. Obviously, if you feel you need to learn more, sometimes YouTube is a good way to find out more about certain problems or certain ideas, data structures. The internet is vast and there's a lot of resources. Feel free to go on there and just kind of like search. You'll find some pretty good stuff. Did you use LeetCode to practice? I did. I don't know if Francisco used LeetCode to practice.
Yeah, I definitely did.
Yeah. How do you shortlist resumes is probably a question better for a recruiter or maybe a manager. But I think the most important thing is to apply. make your resume as best as possible. There's a lot of tips online. Your friends might know as well. Find someone who maybe you think has a good resume and copy it. Obviously put your own data, not theirs, but keep the format. But yeah, there's not, I don't know any like specific tech, how they go about it.
Yeah, I mean, so at Facebook, sort of that process is more on the recruiter side. Maybe like the one thing that I would say is, don't lie on your resume. Like that will come up in your interview, and you don't want to get asked something that you're not familiar with. I think for new grads, if you're sort of in that bucket, this is not a problem. But I've seen like resumes be too big. Just keep it short. Like in my resume, it's like 1 page. And then I have like a little statement that says, if you want more information, I can add more. But like, a really large resume does not sort of signify a ton of experience. And then I think doing things like this, like hackathons, interviews, actual experience, it's really valuable, right? Like I think it makes a huge difference when you're looking at resumes, right? Like if you have somebody that basically all they've done is go to school and take some courses versus somebody that's actually built something, knowing how important it is to, in your team as you're working through things, somebody having more experience, I would say that's something else that I think it's valuable for resumes. But again, I think if you have a recruiter, talking to them, they might be able to help you out with that as well.
Yeah, definitely 1 page. Don't do more than 1 page and try to get as much as you can into it. But obviously, if you're starting, you're probably not going to have too much stuff to fill it out. So don't feel bad. The more experience you get, the more time passes, the more your resume will look full and nicer, I guess. What languages are we typically expected to code in? The language you're most comfortable in is the answer to that one. Your interviewer will not have any expectation unless you're going for like an iOS role or an Android role, in which case maybe they will focus on those languages that are used there. But definitely focus on use a language that you're good at. Don't just like, oh, I'm interviewing at Facebook, I'm going to use PHP, even though I've only used it like twice. It's not a good idea. Your interviewer will not be impressed and it will not have good results for you. What does ask lots of questions entail? I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact context about this. But I think just always, if you're unsure about something, if you think maybe there's something that's not very clear to you, ask a question. Worst case, they'll tell you like, oh, that's what you have to figure out. And you kind of just know where you are. It actually gives you a little bit of signal as well, knowing that you're on the right track. Is having the right solution design good enough even when the code is not correct due to time? I don't know if it's good enough, but it's definitely good. Like you want to have the right solution, you want to have the right design, you want to be able to speak about it. If you run out of time with coding it, you want to make sure that your interviewer knows that you have the right idea. You just maybe weren't able to code it, which is why it's important to tell the interviewer what you want to code before you begin. If you realize that time runs out, maybe you can explain the rest of it, what you would have done. I don't know if it's good enough, but it's definitely the best you can do in that situation. So go for it.
Yeah, maybe a way I would think about that is it's not binary. Like the signal that we're trying to get is not, did you or did you not answer the question? It's way more than that. Again, it's how you interact with the interviewer, how you do, how do you react to feedback, the ideas that you have about solving the code. Like maybe it's, have a pretty novel idea that nobody ever, thought about. And even if you can't implement it, that might be impressive. So I think, don't feel like if you didn't answer or didn't get through the question that it's definitely a no, because there's still a possibility that it's a yes. So
there's an interesting question here about, do you have to write pseudocode on whiteboards or is proper syntactic code expected? The answer to this one is you're always kind of expected in these interviews to write stuff that resembles code. So you're going to go less pseudocode and more actual code. The important detail is your code will not be run, at least at Facebook, we will not run your code. So if you have like a tiny little detail wrong, it's mostly insignificant. If you maybe forgot a semicolon, just when you're looking through your code, add it again. So you want to have it close as possible to real code, but there's no compiler. I've definitely done stuff wrong, used .length instead of .count or whatever. But definitely code is preferred. In terms of improving from the naive solution, it's mostly just practice and experience. Making sure your knowledge of data structures is good will help you kind of recognize when there's optimizations to be made. And then the last question is, how do I get in touch with recruiters? That is a good question. There's, I think checking in here is the best way to do it. There is no minimum requirements for getting an interview. I mean, maybe I think it's just like, are you a student? Are you graduating in the future? I think that's mostly it. Obviously, the more stuff you have on your resume, the more chances of getting an interview. But if you're just starting, you probably won't have too much stuff. So definitely apply. That's the number one advice. Always apply, even if you don't think you're ready for it, because you might be surprised. And it's a good way to start things off. If you never did an internship before, I mean, at some point, no one had done an internship before. So everyone will be at that situation. You got to apply. Make sure to fill out your resume if you don't have an internship with projects, stuff, how you're involved in school. If you're at FIU, maybe UP is a good way to fill out that resume, hackathons. It's just stuff like that. All right, I think that's the end of the questions. I'm going to say thank you so much for listening to me. I hope that was pretty good for you guys. Francisco?
Yes, same here. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for all the questions. If there's one thing that I'll say to everybody here is, don't let, experience, lack of knowledge, don't let anything right now stop you from reaching out, right? Like, if at various points of my career, I wasn't qualified, I didn't have the right level of experience, it wasn't like the perfect time to get that job or that experience, but reaching out, making the connection eventually got me there. And as a company, Facebook is really looking to get more people from this community, our community, to join the company and make an impact. So we want everybody that's here to reach out and connect with us. So thank you very much for showing up and participating. We loved all the questions, and again, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.